Okay, we're going to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Lighthouse Technologies. The topic of today's webinar is the power of testing assessments, keeping your projects headed true north. My name is Lindsay Wilanzik. I'm the Technical Account Manager here at Lighthouse Technologies. Before we begin, I do want to go over a few housekeeping items. We are recording today's webinar. Everyone is on mute, so if you are eating your lunch, no worries, we cannot hear you chewing. Questions will be fielded at the end of the presentation. However, if you do have a question, please type it into the chat with the presenter box on the left side of your screen. And we'll move into a little bit about our presenters today. Julie Hagen is the Senior Practice Manager here at Lighthouse. Julie carries over 20 years of software industry experience and excels in tailoring processes to a metrics-driven, risk-based methodology. And Jeff Van Fleet is our fearless leader here at Lighthouse. He is the President and CEO. He has over 30 years of software and QA experience, which you know, if you know Julie, you know it's a big deal that I point out that she is younger than Jeff.
By a decade, to be clear.
Jeff is also an expert in QA processes and systems. Finally, I'm going to walk us through what we'll be discussing today, and then you will hear from Julie. So we're going to be going over why we do an assessment, what is a testing assessment, performing an assessment, the roadmap to resolution, and the expected outcomes. And so with that, Julie, the floor is yours.
I'm actually going to let Jeff start us off today. I'll try not to interrupt him too much.
That's going to be difficult, I'm sure.
Yeah, so we'll see how that goes.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're glad you're all here, and it should be hopefully a fun and entertaining lunch hour for those of you that are on the East Coast. Those of you on the West Coast may be more of a morning hour, so you might need coffee.
Maybe.
So let me start first with, I'll do the why. So why do you do an assessment, right? And what I kind of want to talk about here is, you've seen this phrase before, to get where you want to go, first you got to know where you are. And the whole point of an assessment is figure out where you're starting from so that you can begin to make intentional improvements in your organization. So everybody, in fact, everybody's striving to get better, at least all of you that are signed in here, right, are striving to get better because you signed up for an assessments webinar.
Right.
And so hopefully you'll get a few nuggets today, and we'll be able to point to some specific things that you can do in short order to help your organization.
And try to keep that word intentional in mind, because I think that's a really important word as we move through this.
Great. So there are things testing organizations often deal with, right? I think the most important is development software is hard. And we talk about that all the time. Not everybody seems to talk about that because it's complex, it's big, and it impacts the business and your businesses dramatically. And so if you get it wrong, you can have major problems in your business. And if you get it right, you can really fly forward.
Yes.
So it's difficult. And the testing organization, as you guys know that are in testing, right, we're kind of at the end of the food chain. And so if development ends up delivering code to us late and we still got to maintain the same schedule, then we end up shortcutting the testing and jamming our teams up, trying to do as best of a job or as good of a job as we can in a short order, which often results in us doing more ad hoc testing than we had planned, which then has its impact of inconsistent and unreliable results, right?
Right.
And the business that funds these software projects, they're always looking for ways, how can the IT organization deliver more functionality to me with less time and money? And the assessment's kind of the first step in that process, right? It's the path that you take to improvement. So with that, let's move on to the next slide. And it really, we love this slide because it really indicates what what can be possible with a good software organization and one that's, as Julie said, intentional about improving. So this is kind of a fairly complex chart. Let me kind of break it down for you simply. If you see that orange bar there, that's the plan line. And if you just stay kind of on the left-hand side of this graph, and as the testing organization, let's pretend that we're only going to look at quality. So for a given release, we plan to have only a certain number of delivered defects. Let's say we'll define the plan for quality as the number of defects delivered into production, which oftentimes is greater than 0. Right? I mean, it is.
Yeah.
And so that's what the orange line represents. What the blue dots represent are the actual results from projects that are going on right now or that were recently delivered. And you can see there's like 1 or 2 that are below the plan line, which means we delivered with better quality than we planned, but there's a whole bazillion of them above the line. And unless you're tracking plan versus actual, you really have no idea where you are.
And they're above the line to varying degrees, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you're a little bit over, sometimes you're a lot over, and it's all over the map because it's inconsistent.
Yeah, exactly right. And what happens is when you put in place an improvement strategy for your organization, you can see as the testing process maturity increases as you move to the right, the funnel gets narrower, and therefore the blue dots get closer together. You get more predictable. And as you're getting more predictable, now you can deliver to the business when they say, hey, well, how long is it going to take? And you say, hey, I can get there in 6 months and $300,000. The organization is more predictably delivering that and increases credibility with the business.
Yes.
The other thing that's really interesting to all of us is if you notice the orange plan line starts dropping. It doesn't just go horizontal as your testing process maturity increases. Well, it starts going lower because you're now planning to be more efficient than you were before because you're better, because you're more predictable, you're more consistent, and there's less mistakes happening. So a lot of good things happen, right? You get predictable and you get more efficient, and therefore you can deliver for less dollars in faster time and meet the business objectives.
Yeah, better time to market and better quality. And lower costs.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why you do a testing. That's the why. You do a testing assessment to figure out where you are so you can intentionally begin to drive improvement. So let's talk about what. So, we talk about why, we'll talk about what, Julie will talk about how, you guys will ask them questions. As Lindsay said earlier, as we go through this, if we're in person, we want you to interrupt with questions, and we'll try to field those. Here in a webinar, it's a little difficult to do that. So go ahead, just type in any questions that pop up for you as we're going through it into the chat box, and we'll make sure we get to the questions at the end. Okay? So what's a test assessment really? And so here we're defining it as a formal process. So it's a structured, objective process that you follow to determine where you are. Objective is one of the key words there, so it's difficult for an organization to do it to themselves because it's really, frankly, hard to be objective, right?
It's really hard to be objective.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to look at your own baby and say, this baby's ugly.
I think I'm fantastic, for example.
That's good. It's good you think that.
Not everybody thinks that. I get it.
So it's important that you engage all the stakeholders in the process and that you look objectively. And really, with our assessment approach or any approach where you take ours or your own, look at people first, then look at your processes, and then finally look at tools and technology. For years, we've been assessing organizations all over the world, and what we've discovered is the people make the biggest difference. In fact, what we talk about is 65% of your organizational efficiency comes from the right people with the right attitude in the right role. So it's all about people. Secondly, it's process. And then lastly, it's do we have the tools and technology to support the people and the processes. So as part of what you're doing in the assessment, you start off with identifying what are the goals and objectives. Whether it's I want quality, I want to improve my quality, or whether I'm more of a CI/CD shop and an agile shop, and I'm trying to get to market faster. A lot of our retail clients are like that. Frankly, a lot of our clients in finance and insurance are trying to get to market faster because there's a lot of competition out there. So
increasingly so.
yeah, it is, right. So these 4 things about increasing your efficiency, right? Can I do it for less money? Can I meet the business objectives more efficiently and get the product out the door faster? So you're always trading off cost and schedule and quality. And as you're planning for an assessment, what we try to do, what we would ask you to do, and frankly, if you're taking notes, one of the key notes we want you to pay attention to is the goal of the testing organization should align with the goals or the strategy of the IT organization. And obviously the IT organization's strategy aligns with the corporate strategy. And often, if we're not, again, intentional, it's easy to kind of get sidetracked from that. And we internally build our own goals that may or may not align, or align well, maybe better stated.
It's easy to get lost, to lose the big picture.
Right.
And being intentional about that helps you avoid doing that.
Exactly. So let's talk about people a little bit here. Julie will dig into that as we go here on the how. But remember, it's about the people, their attitudes and aptitudes of the people. Do they have the right skills? It's about the processes. Do I have some consistency in processes? You might imagine if my processes aren't consistent, I'm not going to be able to get more predictable because everybody's going to be doing their own thing. And lastly, do I have the tools and technology to support that efficiency?
Yeah.
So let me now turn it over to Julie.
We'll see how much he interrupts me.
That never happens.
Never. So earlier Jeff mentioned using an objective I and why that's important and a structured process. So this is the assessment process that Lighthouse uses. Other organizations use other ones, and that's fine. And you might have one in your organization today that you use, and that's all fine. Today we're going to talk through how we do it and how we think about this. What I want you to remember, though, is that as we go through each of these steps, we're gathering findings all along the way. So we're starting broad, and then we are honing in on themes and patterns and findings, and those things all get grouped by commonality and lead to recommended change. So with that said, let's go through it in a little more detail. So kickoff and startup is really important.
It seems like it isn't important.
It seems like it isn't.
It is really important.
Right, and people blow through that.
Yeah.
Oh, we just have to we're going to go kick it off, and then we're going to get to the real work.
Yeah.
That seems to be a common mindset. I would encourage you not to let that happen in your organization, because this is where you're communicating the goals of the assessment itself. This is where you're identifying the difference between the test organization's goals, the corporate goals, better aligning them and establishing the schedule. It's your opportunity to secure buy-in from all the stakeholders, and I can't stress that enough. What's that saying? You never get a second chance to make a first impression?
Yeah, good one.
If you get this wrong, if you don't get buy-in during this time, it's really hard to recover.
Yeah, because as she's going to go through and describe the next steps, you're trying to affect organizational change here, and therefore it involves the people, the organization. So you're trying to get that buy-in. You want to get them understanding what the goal is and why are we doing this. So these same charts about why you'd start with in the kickoff.
Right.
You'd include those things,
absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. And letting them know what do we need from you? What will we be asking from you during this process? It might be, we're going to send you a survey. It might be, some of you are going to be selected for an interview. Give them some idea of what you'll be asking from them during this process.
Like one of the things, a lot of our customers, when we do a kickoff, one of the things that the attendees at the kickoff, they want to know is, okay, so you're going to send me these things, great. How much time do I have to commit to this process, right? So, filling out the survey, maybe it takes you 15 minutes. An interview maybe it's 30 minutes or 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. You realize that, okay, it's not a lot of time investment, and they want to know up front, what am I committing to here, because it's going to impact my day-to-day work as well.
Right, and you don't want them to be surprised. You want them to know that up front. What you might do during this time as well is identify, a couple complete or near completed projects that can be used as a benchmark to establish the current state of the organization.
That's those blue dots, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What was the plan and how did we deliver? Because if you're delivering ahead of plan, maybe you don't even need the assessment in the first place.
Right, right. Good point. So the first step is the survey. So again, broad and then narrowing in. So the survey's kind of broad. So you're going to send it to 100% of the testing organization, but also to some outside organizations as well. You want to include some folks from development. You want to include some folks from the business. If you're set up to have a PMO organization, then you might include some stakeholders out from there.
Right. So, it's everybody that the quality impacts in the organization.
Right.
And so stakeholders is the kind of key phrase.
It really is.
Right.
And in every organization, it can be a little different who those stakeholders are.
Right.
So you have to understand that going in. It gives everybody an opportunity to share their perspective on the testing organization. Examples of some survey questions. Are the resources given the training and support to be successful? Everybody might have, you might get some different answers to that. Some people are going to think they are, some people are going to think they're not. And you have to be able to analyze those patterns to then hone in during the interview process, to dig in and get some more detail.
Yeah, another good question I think that we ask is often, if you're trading off, how does your organization trade off cost, schedule, and quality? Like what wins? And it's really interesting when you look at answers you get from different parts of the organization. The business says, hey, it's all about cost for me. The development organization says it's all about schedule for me, and the testing organization said it's all about quality.
Right.
Well, you got misalignment, right?
You got misalignment.
And so you begin to identify, at least you're identifying, okay, we're all on different pages here. How do we pull this together?
And with that question, you can really get a feel for the culture in the organization as well. Sometimes we'll ask that question in meetings, and whoever the senior leader is in the room just answers it.
Right.
Just answers it from his or her perspective. Other times we're in a meeting, and it's a much more collaborative approach.
Yeah.
And
we were in a meeting a couple weeks ago now, right, with one of our customers in the finance space, and the leader in the room, instead of answering, looked around the room and said, hey, why don't you all give them the answer to the question? And it was really interesting to hear everybody's input without the leader dictating the answer.
Right.
Because then a lot of times when they do that, right, all you get is head nods. Yeah, I agree with her because she's in charge.
Right. So a certain percentage of people in the organization will then be invited to participate in the interview process. And it'll be spread across different levels of the organization. There will be some leaders, there will be some doers.
Right.
You want those multiple perspectives drilling in on the results from the survey. And that interview process, it's not just one interview and you're done necessarily. It's iterative. So you might get different answers to the same questions, and you'll want to either dig in further to that, or you might need to add a role that you didn't identify at the beginning of the project that now you've realized you need to go get that perspective.
Or a piece of the organization that somebody forgot to include.
Somebody forgot.
Right.
Yep, happens all the time. It's interesting, more often than not, you will get conflicting answers to interview questions. But it's interesting, we're wrapping up an assessment right now for one of our retail clients, and for maybe the first time, that didn't really happen.
No, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, the answers were consistent and not
surprisingly
necessarily
consistent.
Contradictory.
Yeah, you're right.
So it makes it a fun process because you don't know what you're going to find, and you can feel your way through it.
Right, exactly. And remember, at the beginning, Julie talked about this starts broad and starts narrowing in. So the survey is a broad brush view. The interviews are really to validate what I heard and got feedback from the survey. And as you dig into that, now people, obviously, they'll elaborate, they'll give you more information, and then you gather more and more findings. So if you're doing this yourself, you're actually, no kidding, taking notes like crazy, man, or woman.
Yeah.
And you're gathering and you're trying to mark them, okay, what are the findings? What did I learn? And so that you can then organize that information as the assessment progresses.
Right. You can do some Pareto analysis and begin to have those patterns that are inevitably going to emerge become clear.
Right.
Okay, so Jeff talked about people and how important people are to the efficiency of software delivery really to any organization, right person, right role. I met with a potential client yesterday and they used the term right person, right seat.
Yeah.
Same thing, right? So that was very important to that customer as well. But a good assessment will include some evaluation of people. Now let me first say, the organization has to be trusting and transparent for this to work.
Yeah.
For people to have the confidence that they're not being assessed so that they can get fired,
Right.
but so everybody can ensure that we're as efficient as possible in having the right people in the right role and closing skill gaps if those exist.
Right.
It's going to be a lot harder battle if people don't trust the process, and that tone can be set during the kickoff and startup.
Yeah, frankly, it needs to be set.
It must be, yeah. So take the opportunity to do that at the beginning during kickoff and startup.
Right, and to that point, when you're doing this skill assessment, so as a development organization, it's not like we're teachers or nurses and we have to have a certain amount of CEUs each year.
Right.
It's not required in our industry, so people aren't used to being tested. And so it's uncomfortable, and you've got to get, again, organizational change. You've got to build that trust so that they know that you're testing me to evaluate where I am so that you can provide training and maybe role alignment to get me in a better role so I can be more successful. It's not about, as Julie said, it's not about, who we're going to fire.
Right.
It can't be about that, and
It won't work.
no,
Yeah.
it won't. Right? Who would want to do that?
Right. So there's, at Lighthouse, the way we do it, there are two pieces to this. There's an attitude and aptitude piece. That's the right person, right role piece, based on attitude and aptitude. Do people have the right traits to be in a software testing role, for example? Do they have enough attention to detail? Do they think in a logical thought sequence? Do they have an inquisitive nature? Are they likely to dig in if something doesn't seem quite right? If you're not like that, it doesn't mean you're not useful to the organization. It just means you might belong in a different role.
Yeah, you could be a developer.
Right. Good one. Developers on the phone, please ignore them.
Okay, I grew up a developer.
And then we do a straight up skills testing assessment as well, a hard skills test. And that's where you can identify gaps that training can close.
Right.
And often it doesn't take a big investment or a lot of time to
No.
close those gaps. The most important piece is identifying them so that they can be closed.
Absolutely. Remember, people first. So if you focus on nothing else in your notepad here, focus on people.
Then we move on to an artifact review after we've gone through the people. So there are really two levels of artifact review that we look at. So the first is at the high level. It's an evaluation of documents used to enable process, making up the test organization's goals and strategy. So some examples of the high level review. Are we agile or waterfall? And what do we have in place that shows that?
Right.
Like where does it say that our organization is agile versus waterfall?
Or a lot of organizations, right, they're transitioning or
Sure.
they're waterfall in their mainframe still as they're moving off of it, but they're trying to be agile on all the new development, the .NET or Java development they're doing.
Right. Is test automation a current part of the strategy? If not, is that intentional, or is that because the organization just hasn't gotten there yet and would like to one day develop a roadmap to automation? How are quality, cost, and schedule trade-off decisions made? How's all of that done? That's the high-level artifact review that we do to understand the foundation before we move into the detail. Then we move on into real test process artifacts. And let me say, it would be rare to find an organization that has all of these.
Yes.
It's okay if you don't have them all. These are the ones that we're looking for. And, gaps will be documented, and the goodness of the ones that exist will be assessed as well.
Right.
So, I won't read them all, but things like an RTM and a test strategy document, test data management process are some examples of things that we're looking for.
Defect management, good point.
Yeah, defect management, absolutely. What kind of metrics, if any, are being used? We are working with an organization right now where everybody agrees that the quality is good. And there's no evidence, there's no anecdotal evidence that the quality isn't good, but there's nothing objective that says it is.
Right, that's exactly right.
If that makes sense. So there's no objective metric being tracked that proves that the quality is as good as everybody thinks it is.
Right, and primarily that was the development and testing organization saying, hey, I think the quality is pretty good. You know, a lot of times when you build a customer-facing application, it's difficult to get a real assessment of how good the product is received by the customers out there. Because if they're going to rate you, generally they're not going to rate you if it's going really well. And only if it's going really badly and they hate it, they're not going to waste their time most of the time.
Right.
So it's really tough to get a feel for that unless you've got some objective measures.
If code analysis is being done in the organization, we would evaluate that. At what level? Is it really just about code hygiene, code analysis, or is it about architecture and structure, something that would uncover security issues or memory leak issues?
Right. Right, there's some great tools out there like CAST that point you to, you know, all of these defects that are embedded in existing code that you have in your portfolio. Yeah, there's a lot of good QA/QC activities that can be done that we're looking for artifacts to see if they're being done or not, or if they're being done consistently.
Right.
'Cause we find a lot of organizations, especially the larger ones that have 10 or 20 or 30 different sprint teams, they're doing things differently. And
yes.
As a result, like their definition of a defect is even different. So it's really hard to compare.
From team to team.
Right, that's
Yeah.
right. You compare across the teams, across the organization. It's really hard to compare how are we really doing because everybody's defined it for themselves.
Right, and now you can't, if you're doing any kind of consolidation, you can't trust the metric then because it's not apples and apples.
Right, and frankly, it's hard to move team members from one team to the next because they know the process from team A, but they don't know it from team Q. So yeah, it's just challenging that way.
So that's a really good segue into process adherence. So say now you do have you know, a standard process defined. This is where the 2 to 3 projects that we selected during the kickoff come in. Because what happens is, you know, we're all guilty of it. Everybody on earth has done it. Documented what you're going to do, have every intention of doing it, and then life happens and we don't do it because there was a fire drill and we cut corners. It happens all the time. So evaluating that process adherence, doing what the artifacts said we would do is an important part of the findings for us.
Right.
Because our customers want to know that if that's what's happening.
Absolutely.
It will deteriorate your consistency and ability to become more efficient.
Right. Remember the goal.
Yeah,
remember that
the
chart
goal.
with all
Yeah.
the blue dots, okay? That's the goal. Get predictable and increase efficiency. At least that's the goal that we think organizations are trying to strive for. And so that's why we want to use those projects to sort of measure where you are. Then you make intentional improvements and measure where you got to.
Tools enable all of this. So we often say tools only represent 10% of your improvement, and it's true. I heard somebody say, it's not our phrase, but one of our customers said, a tool will just make you dumber faster.
That's right.
And I thought that was really funny because that's how things end up on the shelf, because the people and the processes weren't in place first to allow that tool to do what it's meant to do, to help enable everything else.
Yeah, in fact, one of our pharma clients, they have a variety of tools, and the variety of teams use the variety of tools in whatever manner they want to use. So it's really difficult. You can't get a consistent view at all, whether you're using HPALM or using Jira or whatever tools you're using. If everybody's using the tools a different way and inconsistently,
right.
it's confusing.
It won't replace process, but
No.
it will sure as heck make you more efficient if your process is in place and being adhered to consistently, and then the tool can just enable that.
That's right.
So some examples of tools, you know, you guys all know, I'm sure, defect tracking tools, test management tools, automation frameworks,
Right.
Really critical right now in this era of CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and DevOps.
That's right. Yep. And most of you, I know, seeing who's logged in here, most of you are either completely agile right now or heading quickly to agile and to CI/CD. So,
yeah, it's happening quickly
it
now
is.
in the
Yeah,
industry.
and it's great. I mean,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. We've collected a ton of information at this point. Remember, we started broad with the survey. We drilled all the way down through interviews, assessing people, assessing artifacts. All along the way, you're collecting information. So now you have a lot of it.
Yeah, all these findings.
Yeah.
And like when we do it, literally we put them on 3x5 cards.
Yep.
Mostly because I'm so old.
We do. We put them on cards because it's easier to do a Pareto analysis,
And
at
shuffle
least
them.
for us,
Yeah.
and shuffle them around that way before we get them captured in a more technologically appropriate solution.
That's right.
So you boil it down into findings and recommendations that turn into tasks, and those tasks are then actionable and prioritized. It turns into a roadmap. You know, what should we attack first, second, third? Where are we going to get the ROI from implementing the recommendations that have come from these findings? So we encourage organizations to take, we call it a rolling wave approach, and implement this in cycles because it's overwhelming. You can't address all those findings and recommendations in 3 months or even 6 months, sometimes not even in 12 months,
Right.
depending on the size and complexity of the organization. So, you know, boil it down, you know, and make it something that's achievable.
And get some early wins.
Yes, low-hanging fruit. And there's always low-hanging fruit that gets identified.
Right.
So don't feel like every recommendation is going to be so complex that it will be unachievable because, frankly, that never happens.
Yeah, in fact, as we're wrapping up a test automation assessment now for one of our retail clients, it's interesting when you go through the process and you look at the findings. One of the common findings in a test automation assessment is the development organizations have to adjust so that they can set up the code for better test automation and less maintenance activities throughout. So you're going to impact other organizations other than your testing organization by these findings, which, you know, if you go back to the beginning when Julie was talking about,
yeah.
It's these stakeholders. You're going to impact them, right? You want the business bought in. Oh, I get it, right? Especially you talk to a finance person, and they have audits every year of the accounting system. So why do they do that? They want to know that they're clean. They want to know they're reporting things correctly. They want to look for areas they can improve efficiencies on. It's the same rationale here inside your testing organization.
You absolutely want development bought in because
Yes.
what you'll find really quickly when these recommendations come in is that testing can't affect all that change by themselves.
Right.
They have to have the other organizations on board. And in mature, agile organizations, that will be easier because the teams have already been integrated and working together.
Right, and
typically.
sometimes it's really kind of silly things,
Yeah.
at least silly to us, like we don't have a timekeeping system. Well, if you don't have a timekeeping system, you don't know how much effort people are putting into the tasks of testing, so it's really kind of impossible to build a plan versus actual because I never could track that because I just didn't even have a simple timekeeping system. So sometimes there's really easy things they're easy to say, but maybe hard to implement, right? If
Right.
you're not used to tracking time,
Right.
now you ask the organization to change the track time
Right.
to achieve these goals. It just takes some je ne sais quoi.
Look at you speaking French. If your organization makes a decision to take an assessment on this road to improving, I beg of you not to put it on the shelf.
Right.
So execute the roadmap and the schedule that was defined so that you can realize those wins and build momentum. It's about building momentum. When you start to see those early wins and the organization can feel the improvement and the improvement can now be demonstrated because you've got objective measures in place to demonstrate it, then this thing really starts rolling.
Right, and Julie used the phrase, I beg of you to execute, or something like that.
I beg of you not to put it on the shelf.
Not to put it on the shelf. No, the reason she said that is because this whole exercise is about organizational change and the organization trusting, if you're going to take me through this process of this assessment, you daggum better do something about it. So don't get me all fired up and excited that you're going to do an assessment of my testing people and then not ever provide any training if it turns out we're not as good as we want to be in certain areas or whatever. So the people that are involved here want to improve, so only take on the assessment if you feel you have confidence you can move forward with the results.
Yeah, remember you established buy-in at the beginning. So if you did a good job of that, people are bought in and
Right.
they want to see it through. So they'll be really disappointed now if nothing happens.
Right. That's
And
right.
it'll be really difficult to start it up again
Yeah.
with those same people involved because they'll be skeptical now. The credibility has been eroded.
Exactly.
So there is some effort here. We don't want to minimize that, and you wouldn't go to that effort if you weren't going to get something out of it. So assuming that the roadmap we talked about is executed, these are some of the outcomes that you can expect. Things like, knowing the organization's baseline performance. I was in a meeting just yesterday where it came up and the customer said, I have no idea what my baseline performance is. Just knowing that, if that were all you were to get out of it, which we would hope you'd get far more, just knowing that is a really powerful thing to have.
It is. Yeah.
You'll begin to understand your organizational alignment. You'll begin to know how to measure and have objective evidence of quality, for example, and have the data in place to be able to do that moving forward.
And by the way, we use quality as an example because it's easy because
Right.
we're testers, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it isn't just about quality. It's how much money did I spend to achieve the quality that I wanted to achieve? So if I could spend less money in my testing organization or maybe less time and I could get to market faster, but I got the same level of quality, a lot of times that's what the organization's looking for. Hey, quality is actually pretty good. I'm not getting a lot of complaints from customers. Can we get the market 3 weeks faster? So how do we do that? So those measures help give you that opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. You can expect your team performance to improve because you might have better aligned people to different roles. And for sure, you will have closed training gaps that will have an impact.
Right. And you'll build the processes, right, which will help improve, help them follow consistency, which means you're going to get more predictable.
Right. Increase your maturity, allowing you to get more predictable and more efficient. Let's review. Here's what we talked about.
Boom, boom, boom.
Boom, boom, boom. We organized it into very simple: the why, the what, and the how. Jeff talked about why you do an assessment. He went through what is it really, the fact that it's objective and how hard it is to do it internally for that reason. It's hard to be objective against yourself. How we go about performing one, at least here at Lighthouse, there are a lot of flavors of it out there. This is how we do it. How critical that roadmap to resolution is and the rolling wave approach. Understanding how much change the organization can absorb at one time and aligning your roadmap to that, and what good outcomes can be expected.
In fact, something we didn't actually talk about in that rolling wave approach a little bit is if you think about each wave, maybe they're 6-month-long waves or something. What we typically recommend is at the end of the 6th month, you do a kind of a real quick mini assessment. Say, okay, so we intended to accomplish these 10 things over this 6 months, but business conditions changed. Wow. And we can only accomplish 7 of them, but those 7 actually had an impact because now we have some measures in place and we can see what's happening and we actually have measures.
Right.
So you do a mini assessment which lets you kind of lay out the wave for the next 6 months. And
Yes.
so if you think about the cycle that looks like that, that's kind of what it looks like. And maybe every 18 months, 24 months, you might do a full assessment again, just a deep dive across everything.
Yes. We've droned on a little bit here today. So if you get nothing else from it, these are the key takeaways that we hope you'll remember. Set goals. You wouldn't want to take this on without the goal in mind because you'll be kind of shooting in the dark. Assessments allow you to know where you are, objectively know where you are. Be honest with yourselves through this process. That seems really kind of a duh kind of thing. It's hard to do sometimes. It's hard to not look through rose-colored glasses.
It is.
So be honest about where you are. Communicate well with all of the stakeholders. Establish their buy-in right up front. Don't wait and hope that you can get their buy-in later. execute to the roadmap that you laid out, do something with it, and improvement's a journey. So don't expect yourself and your organization to get all this ticked and tied in a 3-month period, because it's just not realistic.
Great. So I'm going to hold this slide to the end.
Let's do that.
And let's talk, I got a couple of slides here that we kind of wanted to go through. For those of you that are familiar with Lighthouse, you'll have seen these. For those of you that aren't, just give you a sense of how we think. So this is really just why we do what we do. And this chart really shows it. So if a software project, if your goal for your organization was a year and $1 million, often, and you see data out there published by Gartner and Standish Group that shows the average is it takes 2.2 years and almost $2 million to get done what you originally intended. And because it's taken so long, and frankly, we have clients in retail that these massive systems that are multi-year systems, they plan to get it done in 2 years. It's taken 5 years to get the functionality done, and they're clamoring so hard that they start cutting functionality so you can get the daggum thing released.
Yeah.
So you can see the data up there. I won't articulate, but we're doing this because as an economy in the U.S., we're spending about a quarter of the money on software on failed and canceled projects. We're throwing 25 or 30% of our money away, and that just bothers us. And we're thinking if we can help organizations save that 25 or 30%, how much more they could accomplish. So some key principles that we think about, that we think align with our customers and with your organizations. We talked about software. It's hard, right? And it's easy for projects to get off track. So, and if you don't put in a measurement system, you obviously can't manage. You don't know where you are. So you're off track, and you don't know you're off track, or you're heading off track.
Right. You find out when it's too late to really affect change, and that's the problem.
That's right.
Not measuring.
And these kinds of things like assessments and process improvement, organizational change, they really only work in trusting and transparent cultures. It's really difficult if you've got a culture that doesn't trust its leadership.
Yeah.
And so it's important to build that trust in order to affect change in the organizations. And we talked about the people, right? You got the right people, motivated people. We've proven it time and time again. You got the right people, they can accomplish amazing things. So, and if you give them good processes, they're going to inject far fewer defects during the development process, and they're going to remove way more before that product gets out the door. And a lot of you have seen a lot of this data from us, but what happens is if your team doesn't find the defects through the development process in each of the phases, that defect leaks from the requirements phase into the architect phase, and we architected a piece of the system that is wrong because we got the wrong requirement. And then we designed it perfectly, but we designed it to a wrong requirement. You can think about all this wasted effort. We call it unplanned rework. And so our mission is really to help you save that 25 and 30% by reducing unplanned rework.
Yeah. And we talk about that unplanned rework in a lot of detail in some of our other webinars. So if you're interested in understanding that better, just keep an eye out for those or give us a call.
That's right. We're a quality company.
Yeah.
We do manual and automated testing for clients. We obviously do these assessments for clients, but a lot of times clients, they go through this webinar and they want to try it on their own. And then we provide consulting. And frankly, in the ERP space, we provide consulting there and some simple staff augmentation in the swim lanes we play in, project management, BAs, obviously testers.
Yeah.
So if we can help you in any of these manners, don't hesitate to reach out.
So I think we can go back to the questions now.
Yeah, let's go to the questions.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm back. I know you guys missed me so much.
Thank you, Lindsay.
We're going to go through a few questions. It looks like we did have a few. The first question is, how is an assessment different from an audio, for an instance, a software security audit?
I think I meant audit. How's it
Audit,
different
I'm sorry.
Seemed like there should be a drum beat there. Or
Yeah.
I think the answer is it's kind of the same thing, right? Different people call it different things. I think the word audit is a little harsh.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
And the goal of this isn't to audit the organization to beat them up. The goal is to assess where they are so you can improve. So I think it's a terminology thing. It might be a mind shift thing as well.
It might be.
But probably it's kind of the same approach.
All right, the next question I think is a really great question. Do you take the same approach to assess a project that is struggling to provide a road to recovery for that project?
That is a good question. You want to take that?
Sure. The overall approach is the same, just with a much more narrow focus. So you might not survey as many people, you might not interview as many people. It's more constrained to that specific project.
Right.
But the overall approach of kind of starting broad and honing in still applies.
Exactly. So if we're talking about a testing organization or testing team on a particular project, then the approach is probably very much the same.
Right.
But if we're really talking about the actual software project itself, then we're going to do a few different things. So we're going to run, for example, we'll run the cast code analyzer because what it will do is it'll identify the high-risk areas of the code that usually cause most of the problems. So it'll identify security leaks, it'll identify memory leaks, it'll identify what's called McCabe complexity, which is basically a measure of testability, if you will, of each of the modules. And if development organizations aren't intentional about keeping things simple, that complexity will cause the system to break all over the place. And so when you run a code analyzer, for example, it'll point to probably 10 to 15% of the code that's the most complex, that will have the most problems in it. And then you'll focus the development team on remediating those areas, along with the security leaks and memory leaks.
Yeah, and we'll try to collect some data that will give us some idea of key performance indicators on that project,
Right.
so that we know how bad it is, how much is it really struggling.
Yep, exactly.
And adjust from there.
Yeah, something we didn't mention, we talked about that baselining thing up front. So baselining by itself is important, but what's also important is benchmarking the organization. A lot of customers come to us and say, hey, I've got a development partner that I lean on to do a new point of sale system, for example, or I outsourced part of my insurance application to a development partner. How do I know I'm getting good value for the dollar? Or how do I have confidence they're going to deliver against the schedule they said they would deliver? And we can answer that question and talk about that offline, but there are benchmarks that show U.S. and world averages for what it should cost to deliver software systems. And part of we do in a broader software assessment is include those kind of things as we're looking at development vendors.
Okay. All right, next question. In your interactions with clients who need a testing assessment done, have you found differences in how organizations respond to your assessments based on what industry the organization is in?
That is a really interesting question.
It is.
I'm going to chime in with my thoughts, and I'm sure Jeff will chime in with his.
I've got nothing.
That's not true.
Organizations absolutely respond differently to assessments, more based on culture than by industry, but sometimes there are common cultures across an industry.
You said exactly what I was going to say. Right? So, we could look at our retail clients and find some commonalities. We could look at our pharmaceutical clients, find some commonalities. Because you think about the pharmaceutical industry, they're highly regulated, so they tend to think differently than you might in our insurance clients, which frankly they're fairly regulated as well, right?
Right.
But I agree with you. It's culturally driven.
It's culturally driven, right? And an organization in a vertical may or may not fall in line with the typical pattern for that industry.
Right. Right.
So that was a little long-winded, but I hope that it made sense.
Yeah, in fact, that's the first time we've ever had that question.
It is,
So
yeah.
It's kind of cool to get some unique questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, more questions. How long does a typical assessment take?
I don't know, 3 or 4 hours.
Depends on the size of the organization. On the low end, 2 weeks. Maybe on the high end, 6. to 8.
Yeah, I would have
I
said
mean, if we're
probably.
talking about testing only.
Yeah, I would probably have said 4 to 5, 4 to 6, maybe 3 to 6. You're right. If we're talking testing only, if it's an entire software organization, it often takes longer.
Yeah.
We've done some for the federal government that take months, because you might imagine, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people involved. But for typically, I think 3 to 6 weeks is a fair number.
It's driven heavily by the size of the organization.
It is. Yep.
Right. To use your phrase, we are an ad hoc testing organization. How do we get started?
Start with people. I always think start with people, because if you can validate that the right people are in the right role and close skill gaps, you can get really quick wins. What do you think?
I agree with you. I would start with people as well. If you're ad hoc and you're fairly small, your testing organizations, 10 people or under or something, I agree. I think if you assess those people and let them know you're on their side to getting them in the right roles and getting them the right training, I think that will go a long way toward improving the organization.
Yeah.
Okay. Can an assessment be done in-house, or does it normally necessitate a consultant or third party?
Well, you have that objectivity problem, right? You also have skill set problems sometimes.
And bandwidth.
Bandwidth, yeah, for sure. So, at Lighthouse, we follow a structured process. If you've never done it before internally, it might be difficult to work through that, if it's your first time doing it.
Right, but if you've done it before,
right,
you
then
probably
maybe,
can, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you have a PMO that is sort of independent from your testing organization, they might be able to do it for you if they've got a process. But most of the time, what customers find, and they tell us this, is it's better to have the third party, it's better to have a Lighthouse in there doing it, because we get more clean answers from the people. They're not trying to appease their boss.
Right.
So they're honest.
Yeah, normally the organizations that we speak with prefer to have a third party involved.
Right, and they trust our sensitivity to the information, so we're not disclosing, like if your boss is the one asking you the question, how's it going? Hey, it's going great, right?
Yeah.
But we're really protective of the information, and the organization prefers that. I mean, we prefer it as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, looks like we have one final question. How would you recommend selling this to upper management?
Well, we talked about how increasing the maturity of your testing organization affects the overall delivery, right? So as you become more efficient, you lower your cost. You have fewer defects leaking, that lowers your cost. So there's an ROI there that can be quantified.
Right, and I go back to the example with the accounting organization, right? Yeah. They do regular audits and assessments of their organizations for specific purposes. You're now trying to do the same, because what you're trying to do is paint the path forward to improvement, which will have impact those KPIs that Julie talked about. So I think it's fairly easy to sell it to the organization, because it's not that expensive to do an assessment.
All right, so you guys are making me look like liars. It looks like we have one final question. Love it so much. So maybe the question is, are you able to say how much the assessment typically costs? And he offered that we could give a range if it works better.
It really depends, because it depends. There are a lot of variables involved.
Sounds like we're hedging the question.
Yeah, it does. We're really not. It's just that it's so dependent on the size of the organization. I would, be happy to talk about that offline. Yeah,
I mean, like the organization we're wrapping up right now is only about 15 people.
Yeah, it's pretty small.
Yeah. Where, we've done organizations of, commercial customers of 250 people. Obviously, we've done defense,
right.
Government organizations of like 600 or something. But
so we could give a range, but it would be too wide to be useful.
Yeah.
So, you know, give us a call, or if you don't mind me reaching out to you, the person who asked the question, then we can handle it like that as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're glad to talk through this.
Glad
with
to
you
talk
guys.
about it. Yeah, not trying to hide it, just want it to be useful information.
Right.
Okay. All right, so it does look like those are all the questions. So on behalf of everyone here at Lighthouse, thank you so much for attending today's webinar on the power of testing assessments. For now, our team is standing by to answer all of your calls. Our main number here at Lighthouse is 937-458-0055. Julie is at extension 328, and Jeff is at extension 201. And again, the number here is 937-458-0055, and you can speak with Jeff or Julie at your convenience. We look forward to hearing from all of you, and we hope that you have a great rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.